Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 5th edition, this one, of the Situation Room Uganda. And this afternoon, we look at the national budget priorities. Do they reflect the public interest? Ordinarily, of course, a national budget is the intention of government, to get revenues and expenditures in a financial year. But more times, probably those interests of the public do not come in as far as the preparation for the budget is concerned. But does Uganda, does Parliament, does the Ministry of Finance, indeed government, do those institutions follow the processes of budget preparation so that the interest of the public, the interest of you and I who are seated here are taken up and consolidated into what becomes the agenda that drives the development of this country? I have an interesting team of panelists here, Ugandans. On my extreme left, there is Jacob Eyeru. He is a youth ambassador for Uganda for the East African community. You're most welcome. Next to him is Sam Kavuma. He's the chairman, he says he's the interim chairman of the National Youth Council. You're most welcome, Sam. There is Sisi Agaba. She's mostly known for fighting corruption, but she heads the Anti-Corruption Coalition of Uganda, also known as ACU. Sisi, you're most welcome. And of course, to my left immediate is Robert Chirunda. He is a lawyer by profession and teaches law at Makerere University Law School. You're all most welcome, and please put a hand clap for them. Let me start with you, Sisi. You are the only lady on the team, and ladies first, as they say. When you look at the new law that was put in place this year, the Public Finance Management Act of 2015, it provides for an elaborate process of, a budget and bringing in new elements where Parliament is now supposed to go through the vetting, the scrutiny process of a budget before, as it used to be actually prior to 2015. Does that take into interest, the concerns, the priorities that people out there across the country have for their country?
I think one of the things that we need to ask ourselves when we're talking about priorities, who sets the priorities and where are the priorities coming from? Of course, when you go back to the law, it is different when you have the law in place and also actual implementation. The Public Finance Act is actually it's a very good law. And of course, one of the things that we saw for the very first time was ensuring that the budget was presented before Parliament early enough. And of course, it did try to mitigate some of the things that should have happened. But we need to also understand that before this budget, in addition to presenting the budget, Finance was supposed to have appended another list of accounting officers. This list was actually not part and parcel of the budget. And actually, remember, civil society, we actually came up recently and we were actually castigating the Secretary to the Treasury, because it was very clear that if accounting officers are going to be approved, they should have been cleared by the Auditor General's reports. Now, you realize that, and these are people that should have accounted for funds quickly enough. And which funds are we talking about? These should be budget funds. But then you realize that there are certain things that were not done in line with the current law. Now, you realize that such issues, when the laws just come into place and you're still finding it very difficult to implement, it becomes a challenge. Bigger picture, when we talk of the priority areas, again, as per the law, the priorities may be good. When you talk of security, actually we all like security. It's very, very good. When you talk of roads, it is very, very good. The reading is actually good when you look at the set priorities. You talked about the issue of consultations. Doing the consultations down at the grassroots. What type of budgets do the people at the districts receive? If you're receiving conditional grants and the grants are actually tagged to particular activities, then where are you going to get money to consult the actual people? And if you haven't consulted the person at the grassroots or the person that is going to be affected, then how are you coming up with the priorities? But then we can presume and say, okay, fine, let us look at the National Development Plan. One of the things it talks about is roads. When you look at roads, the NDP and the actual allocation, again, there's a very big mismatch. When you talk about agriculture, roughly when you look at the NDP, agriculture should be given around 1 trillion, but the actual that was given is around 480 billion. Now, when you again talk about some of these priorities, I would say they are good, but there's a very big mismatch between the allocations and the actual implementation. I could still take you back again to agriculture, because you know directly or indirectly it employs over 70% or so of our people. But when you go to the breakdown of the, you realize that most of these monies will be going to either workshops, salaries, and the key priorities of the people are going to be missed out. So I think for me, that is where the whole issue is when it comes to priority. The priorities are good, but when it comes to actual implementation and allocation of funds, that is where we find a mismatch.
Let me bring it very quickly to Robert. Sisi mentioned something interesting, the issue of the mismatch in terms of input and output in the budget process. And I want you to take it from two other critical priority areas, health and education. Because the budget looks at what I may call aggregate performance, and which probably in your take you have to tell us what you think, whether that is the model that we as a country should be running with. That education, for example, if they say they have given education, let's say 1.8 trillion, they are looking at the quantity rather than the quality. And then when you look at roads, or when you look at health, they are looking at building the health centers, the houses, the units for maybe maternity ward, but they're not looking, the citizens are complaining, we don't have drugs, we don't have the doctors. You know, in Busia recently, there is a report that actually Busia Hospital, because of not paying electricity bills, they cannot even do operation. So Ugandans are crossing into Kenya in order to get, what is your view, your take of how better this can be done?
Charles, first of all, it's good to be here, and thank you for putting this together. I take a slightly different view from and the idea that you can just throw money at a problem and hope that it's in the public interest, I think is warped. My view is that take health and education that you talked about, invest first in the people, then what? First who, then what? Last year, the top story in the health sector was doctors are not paid. The intervention government has suggested is build them homes. Why? So that you can resolve absenteeism. But we know that they are not absent from Mulago because they have nowhere to stay. They're absent from Mulago because they are at Case Clinic or some other private clinic. So pay them first, then we can worry about their homes. That's where I think the warping of priorities comes from. I come to the issue of quantity versus quality. I teach at the law school, and when I went to law school, there was a quality of essays that you expected from a student. That quality has gone down, and the only logical explanation is UPE. The fact that the idea that you can have numbers, you can't solve certain problems by multiplying. You can't get more chicks by hatching eggs over a shorter period of time. That's not how it works. You need to be able to invest in the quality before you can go into the quantities. This is what Singapore saw. Singapore took deliberate efforts to improve the quality of their genetic pool. So they began to encourage people to take certain interventions to improve the quality of education and the results that they got. And now when you go to Singapore, you have perhaps one of the countries with the highest skilled labor in the world. Why? Because they were deliberate about quality. You can't wish that away. So I think there's a clear mismatch between how much money you're throwing at the problem vis-a-vis the needs of the people, and secondly, how you go.
Mr. Kavuma, you represent a big constituency, the youth constituency, and over, is it now 64% of them who are unemployed, and that, you know, portends a big problem for this country going forward, because if you have a population that is unemployed and yet very energetic, very eager to learn, very eager to take, you know, charge of situations in their hand, that becomes a big problem. Just tell us what your take is but also in line with the issue of consultation. Are the youth usually consulted? Is the National Council of Youth consulted when it comes to like the moment that Parliament or Ministry of Finance is working on the budget, so that that becomes a priority that probably informs Youth Entrepreneurship Fund? Do you have that going on?
Thank you very much. Yeah, that is really a good question. And I look at, I agree with you, looking at Uganda's population as we speak of today. Of course, the biggest portion, it forms, I would say, the biggest portion of the labor force that we under today. And also, minus that, the influx of young people joining the labor force, the rate is high, and I think all of us know that Uganda has one of the highest rates of how many young people are joining that bracket. And when you look at in terms of the process, I would say the process of consultation throughout, before we go into the issue of whether it is effective or not, then we look at even the population and the citizen understanding the budget cycle process, how it moves on. If you see, I've seen always reactions, especially from the population. In most cases, you get reaction from the population and from the people at the time when they're reading the budget. But we all know that the cycle starts as early as the new financial year is really coming in. And when you talk about participation, at effective participation, looking at all the sectors of young people, how are they involved? Look at the rest of who are the players involved in the youth fraternity. We have the youth leadership, we have the civil society, focused youth-led civil society, or those who are focused on youth issues. We have legislators who are representing young people. We have agents in governments who are supposed to be dedicated to work with young people. Young people who are leaders at the local government process, where most of this come from. I think when you look at it at the broad basis, that's where we look at it. Because sometimes, yes, the leadership may be involved, but how effective is the leadership to be able to get views from the rest of our young people? Are we only representing our views, or it comes from down? And today, when you look at the kind of environment we are having, and the population we are having today, you have government sectors that may not understand on how to reach on to the young people. You will see today, if you to get most active young people, especially the elite class, you'll find them in social media, you'll find them in most of these platforms, where if you take deliberate policy to get different views, it's going to become difficult. Now, let's go in terms of ICT. How many of those young people would be able to give out, even when they want to consult, but the question comes in terms of the platforms to be able to put in. That's where the challenge comes in. But when we are looking at the budget, these days we no longer look at issues of young people as concentrated in one sector. Or like say there's a ministry for youth. Issues of young people today are cross-cutting. Right from local government, when you're starting from the budget support, how are the young people involved? If you're talking about one sector like agriculture, truth to be told today, the biggest labor force is young people. If you want to engage in agriculture and at boost production, you must focus on the young people. If it is ICT, if it's trade, if it is health today, the most biting people are affected by this is the young people. So now we take it at a holistic level and looking at how do we mainstream that every sector of government focuses on issues of young people. But I'd like to answer the question directly. Consultation has not been effective, one, because of lack of using the platforms which are available, and also the issue of the cost of consultation, which becomes also another issue.
Can you just hold it there? Because when you talk about the challenge of, the challenge posed by the type of platform, and then you bring in the issue of the cost, I agree with you, it's supposed to be expensive, but isn't that supposed to be the case? Democracy is not cheap, because the alternative, which is anarchy, is even more expensive, costs lives and all that, and leads to destruction. But I want you to, because I'm interested for the audience to know what your suggestion is in terms of what do you recommend that can be used to redirect, the formalization of, the formulation of these priorities, so that then the priority becomes the priority that came from the people, in this case, the youth.
Yeah, thank you. If I would go directly to that, I've matched the process is a little costly, but Uganda, we have structures in place that you can easily utilize to engage young people, and actually, which may end up being a little cheap. I'll give you an example. If I'll go to one sector, the students community, which is part of the young people, you have leadership of young people, right from the GID leadership, that engaging them at that level, you don't need to spend a coin. At least what you need to do is to give them a platform. And these are intellectuals that debating issues to do with the budget, you get a lot of information lying with that. That is one structure that would say. You have a structure that runs right from the last unit, which is in a classroom, to the national level. Most of you know it, it's called the Uganda National Student Association. That means, and every institution can be, even at that level, you can be able to debate such national issues at that level. Such a structure is self-sustaining, because the young people from there, every Ugandan student subscribes a fee that helps them to maintain themselves. The other organ is, right now you have young people that sit in local governments with fully mandate like any other councillors at that level. Where I talked about the issue of being costly, I'll give it from our side, that even most of these young people out there, it has been costly for us to build their capacity to be able even to understand, to train them in issues of budget advocacy. You're having a young person sitting at, for example, in KCCA, you're having a young person who is out there, but through affirmative action is that level. Now, for him to understand on how to articulate issues at that level, it means you must reach out to them and build his capacity so that when he stands on the floor, he can be able to look at some of these issues. So you find that even an organ like that, it becomes costly. And that's why you'll find that institutions like civil society will come in, especially to help like this. So if you focus in strengthening such kind of structures, giving them platform, even in the civil society, it means it becomes very difficult, because these are structures that reach down to the rest of other levels.
First, hold it there. I want to come very quickly to Jacob, another young, representative for this country at a regional level. Jacob, there is one burden when we talk about budget priority and how we can use a budget for socio-economic transformation. The aspect of the debt of this country, and it's one area that we cannot run away from, because it is people like you, it is people like me, it is people like many of them in the audience here and out there that will bear the brunt of this burden, in 10 years, 15 years, when we have to pay back. And we don't know whether these debts are used for the right purpose to contribute to socio-economic development. What's your take on that? Is it being done right? What is your alternative view to that?
Thank you so much. First and foremost, I think that our debt burden is not yet very bad as a country. We have a debt burden of about 27% of GDP, and not yet very bad by international standards. So the question that stays is, will we be able to recover from this debt burden? I think that is the more pertinent question. And that stems back to what are our priority areas as a nation. Are they priority areas that will see us grow in our GDP earnings as opposed to? I think that is a very pertinent question. Let me just. Hello? Thank you. So if we are getting ourselves into a debt burden annually, the question is, do we need the debt burden? As Uganda, I feel we need to work on some areas. The challenge is we never really get the accountability for these debt burdens that we keep incurring. We never really see the services that come from the accumulation of our debt. And that is a problem. If we cannot account for what we borrow, then we are having a problem with our nation. And it becomes a challenge to the young man, to the young woman who will become a leader tomorrow. you're getting into an area or you're being groomed in a system where the debt burden is accumulated but without the provision of services. We are being groomed into a mindset that tells us that you can borrow to exist and you do not need to think about how you will pay back. I think government needs to start working on a strategy that will foresee a debt burden reduction on our GDP, let alone sustain us without borrowing. I think that is a very important thing. But it comes down to how much investment are we having, and the Youth Entrepreneurship Fund is trying to avert such measures. The problem again comes back to the state of implementation. The Youth Entrepreneurship Fund, how is it being implemented? More than just giving out the money, is the money actually working for the people for whom it is intended? If we are to survey Tororo, for example, young people were scared of picking when it was initially called the Youth Livelihood Fund. They said, how are we going to pay back? The only way they could be convinced into paying, to picking the money was to be told that, you know, government is in the habit of forgiving. So in the event that you cannot pay, government may forgive you. They say, oh, is that so? Then let us speak. So the mindset of the young man has been groomed to be defeated by the system, that initiatives that are taken are not able to release the returns that we expect of them. It is either in the quality of the entrepreneur, in the young person, or in the market itself. But overall, it comes down to the training. How do we give money to people to start up businesses before we train them how to run these businesses? How do you take to a rural, uneducated young man or young woman 4 million shillings and tell them, look here, you can start and then have a return that is worthwhile? So the debt burden cannot be reduced before we have internal capacity of our populace to actually begin to earn and to invest in the GDP ratio of our country.
Thank you so much. And the audience, of course, this is the Situation Room Uganda, and this is the 5th round of the debate, the national debate that is going on. And just for those who are just joining us from out there, that we are looking at the national budget priorities. Do they reflect the public interest? To at this point now hand you over to my colleague Sheila Nduhutire, who is going to now get the comments and the questions from the audience that is seated right here. I want to let you know that we are in Katonga Hall at Serena Hotel in the capital city in Kampala here. Sheila.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you, our panelists. My duty is to deal with the audience, and, well, the rules of engagement are very clear. Keep it short, precise, direct the question to the panelists. The more direct it is, the more it will easily get answered, and let us be as civil as possible. I will now take the gentleman. I'll request that you come here, please, so that we have clear understanding of. Again, for those who have just joined us, we are discussing national budget priorities. Do they reflect the public interest? Are you convinced that, for instance, what was in this budget is in sync with our vision 2040 as a country?
Thank you, Sheila, and the panelists. I am very happy today that you bring the youthful panelists on this panel. This has been my complaint always. And I appreciate my former, you know, Mr. Kavuma is a former chairman of National Youth Council. The National Youth Council is not existing anymore. So if we say interim and this, we are going to confuse the public. I am Dr. Silanda Gerard Blacks. I come from the Democratic Party, the president of the Uganda Young Democrats, and also the president or the chairperson of the Interparty Youth Platform, IYEP, and the chairman of the Normal Campaign. Whatever we are discussing here as the young people, we are saying no more. This country, if you look at priorities and you look at health priorities, for me as a person, as a villager from Palisa, I believe Palisa Hospital Health Center 3 in Kasodo has an annual budget of monthly quarter budget of 1.4 million. The RDC in Palisa has a budget of 40 million in a month. The deputy RDC has around 35 as well. They have a driver, But the hospital, health center 4, that takes care of 3 sub-counties, has a budget line of 1.4 million. Now, is that a priority for this country? I want a panel to help me understand. Palliser Regional Referral Hospital does not have power for the last 8 months. It does not have water for the last 1 year. And the wards, or the labor ward, one labor suit ward, in the labor suit there is only 1 bed, the rest of the women are delivering from down. Does that give us a priority for the country as you look at this budget? The administrative costs of this country, I have shared this with Mr. Kavuma, he knows that the administrative costs of this regime is too much. There is what we call the National Medical Council that is in charge of recruitment. The government still allocates money there, and yet the recruitment of service providers and health workers is reduced to a district level. But when you look at the budget, money is still being allocated there. So do we, at what point do we get to review at how much money was used to the money that, and the money arrives late? And what do we do with the money that is being allocated to sectors that are not working? Maybe finally, the allocation of a budget of thinking about security. For me, the first security of a country is when people are still talking about food. If people are not sure whether they will eat, whether they will get food in the health medication, for me that's the first insecurity of the country.
Doctor, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I am sorry for taking a lot of time.
Short.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right. If you're watching us, you can be part of this conversation online. We are on @TheSitRoomUG on Twitter, and of course Facebook, The Situation Room Uganda. And of course, @NTV Uganda. Hashtag is TSRU. We will be able to capture all your comments, supplements, and even questions to our panelists. I'll take one more person before we go for a break, so please keep it short. There's so many of us here and would like to speak. Please come. Gender balance.
Thank you so much for balancing the gender like this. Our panelists, the moderator, my name's Owori Moses Kibang. I come from Forum for Democratic Change, where I am the legal secretary for the Youth League. Very brief, I would like to direct this to Mr. Kavuma. We've been talking about the young people and the structure to which services are rendered according to him, and how easy it is to use the structure to actually engage the young people to get policies that are necessary and good. Mr. Kavuma, I don't know if you remember in your mind to know that the leaders whom we are led have always not regarded the structure as you say. I would like to be on record and to remind all Ugandans that one of them is Mr. President Museveni, who have not regarded the issue of the structures and how he will be shunned the service to the young people or to the people. I have one vivid example. When he visited the region of Busoga sometimes, maybe last year or two, he carried some services to the young people of that region in a sack. It was money that was given, and I thought to him it was to answer the problems of the young people in that region. And he also believes that there is a structure of the young people that are set right from the grassroots to the national level. But he chose to go in that format. That culture of breaking and disregarding the structure that we're talking about. Do you see that style giving Uganda a direction of perceiving the problems of Uganda and so directing them to answer the challenges of people in that style of taking service by sacks of and envelopes, the culture that we are seeing here. Last time during the recent budget reading, he was defending himself and he said But the reason he gives in sacks and envelopes is because he's a president. But if you're a president who would see the need to extend an envelope into the hand of an individual, not in the structure, it's itself an indication that there is no structure and there is no way Ugandan will listen to its citizen, then to perceive, to guide into the proper allocations of funds or services into the national budget.
Thank you
That's
so
mine.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The conversation continues. Of course, our panelists are taking those questions. We're going to take a very short break and return with you, the home audience, your questions, and of course, we'll come back to the audience here for more comments and questions. And of course, before we go, I would just like a reminder, of course, the panel, not really reminder, but something we can chew on. The president recently said, if you think agriculture is important, I'm trying to really speak like that. He said, you think agriculture is important, go and start a farm in Somalia. So after all, defense and agriculture have, they're both priorities. Thank you. We take a very short break. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
News Updates is brought to you by Salolin. Color your world.
What a wonderful world. Ooh, yeah.
Welcome back. You're watching the 5th Situation Room Debate Uganda series happening at Kampala Serena Conference Center, Katonga Hall in particular. And of course, if you're watching us, you can be part of this conversation online, Twitter, at the Seatroom UG, or follow the hashtag TSRU, or on Facebook, the Situation Room Uganda, or on NTV. We left, and I promised that we would be coming back to you, our audience, for questions and comments or supplements. Please keep them very short. I need a lady. Okay, as the ladies prepare, gentlemen, please come out. Your question, your name, and please keep it short. All of us here would want to ask a question.
Thank you very much. I am Lubowa Henry. I am a Secretary General of the Social Democratic Party of Uganda. 4 issues. 1, there was a concern, how do we arrive at these priorities? Now, as a practitioner in political parties, I want to ask, really, is the NRM, as the primary owners of this budget, is it able to consult amongst themselves? Otherwise, I think if they were able to consult amongst themselves, then we would have a different ordering of the priorities. I don't agree that the priorities in the budget are the ones that are the aspirations of the Ugandans. One is that when you move in the countryside, unemployment, poverty, but when you look at the budget, you don't see government or the NRM trying to do enough to get Ugandans out of unemployment and poverty. Case in point is that of agriculture versus security. 400 480 billion for culture and 1,600 billion for security. It doesn't add up. Of course, the president, after 1 or 2 years, is going to say he was misadvised out of the statement he made. We should know that if the president thinks that security is too important, let every Ugandan be unemployed, and this is what happens. Unemployment is a big core source of insecurity. Okay? So, by not creating enough employment for Ugandans, I think it's very bad for this government, and I think it skews our preferences and interests. There is no way we can create employment if we don't increase spending and expenditure for agriculture. I think looking at 400 and 1,600 is not reflective of key priorities of the country. The other one is production. I think
maybe Mr. Lubowa, can you be more clear, because someone might think you're saying 1,600 is 1,600 shillings.
1,600 billion. That is
1.6 trillion as opposed to 485 billion for agriculture.
Yeah, I think it doesn't add up, because we have said 68% depend on our culture. That is 24 billion. When you relate with security, let's say the army, 50,000 army officers, okay, are taking 6 trillion, and 24 million are only are taking 480 billion. Lastly, on production, we are having a problem. Every day the shilling is losing value, and everybody is saying that, but we are not producing enough. Is there anything in the budget that reflects that government is working towards increasing local production? It isn't there. And I think that is where we should focus. The budget is missing areas where we are encouraging local production. And the moment we are missing that, then we are going to have a problem. The other day I was looking at figures. Our revenue collections for Uganda last year were 9 trillion. This year we are expecting 11 trillion. But when you factor in the real terms against the dollar, you see that we are not making progress, because as a result of crowding out, given the fact that when we collected 9 trillion, the dollar was at 2,600. This year, the dollar is at 3,600. When you make conversions in dollars,
in 30 seconds.
When you make conversions in dollars, you see that we are making regressions. We are not making progress. So I think that priorities are not good, and as a country, we need to really go back and refocus. Lastly, madam, on the debt, in 1 second, my brother, I want to tell you something, that we are not doing well, and the debt is not good. If we are collecting only, if we are able to collect in a year 11 trillion, but our debt is 22 trillion, how can you say that we are doing well? The debt is 22 trillion, but we are able in a whole year only to collect in all our revenues as a country 11 trillion. I think that is not good for me as an income earner. So I think let's not sit here and be just idealistic. Let's be realistic. The country is headed in a very, very wrong direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have a question online, and it goes to Mr. Robert Chimunda. The fact that supplementary budgets can be as big as 7% of the total budget implies a wide deviation from the core priorities. How can we move away from this as a country? Do you want me to say that again? The fact that supplementary budgets can be as big as 7% of the total budget implies a wide deviation from the core priorities. How can we move away from this as a country? I'll take about 2 more questions before we cross back to our panelists. The gentleman in his striped shirt. Okay, they're both striped. Okay. Whoever will make up their mind first.
Thank you very much, Sheila. My name is Moses Egunyu, and I work for the Interparty Youth Platform. Now, I have had a chance to review district local government budgets, and I will tell you that the allocations for youth-related activities, is it 0% or 1 point? There is no budget allocation for youth activities at the local level. I appreciate that there are youth programs running at the national level, but at the local level, it is very difficult to trace how local governments prioritize the issues of young people. And I would like to agree with Cisse over there. It is impossible for the national budget to address local priorities if, first and foremost, its development process and formulation did not include the full participation of local citizens. It is definitely very difficult to achieve a budget that will address the needs of the people if the people themselves who know the problems they face did not fully participate in developing that budget. At the local level still, if you go back to the districts, it is very difficult to find district officers reaching out to local people to consult with them. And if you look at the budgets, the documents themselves at the district level, it is a cut and paste process. Every year, for those of you who have bothered to look into those district documents, they cut and they only change figures. But to go and really get matters or issues that affect the people from the ground, it is very difficult. Finally, my question goes to Sam. I would like to find out from you what deliberate efforts or programs the National Youth Council carries out in an attempt to reach out to young people at the local level. What exactly do you people do at the National Youth Council? And did you, for example, solicit views of young people about the national budget? Did they contribute towards the process during the budget cycle? Thank you.
All right. This gentleman, your question, please keep it short as well.
Thank you very much. I'm called Edward Natamba, and I work with Civil Society, an NGO called Southwestern Institute for Policy and Advocacy, based in Ntungamo. Actually, I'm really concerned about the gap between the budget allocations and implementation. I have been doing advocacy at the local level, mainly in Southwestern Uganda, and just on Thursday, I visited a school which started in 1981. It has 7 classrooms, but the government has just built 2 classrooms, and others are just collapsing. So I want to agree with these people, actually, panelists, that if we need to achieve our vision, we need to really strengthen the structures of government. If the local governments cannot plan really to invest, like in education, in primary schools, and construct such classrooms, really, are we going to achieve our vision 2040? So I think we need to, the central government need to really give powers to the local governments to make sure they plan, not only considering these conditional grants that come and actually go to salaries and whatever, but we need to look at the problems that local people face. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will cross very shortly to our panelists, but I have one more question for Ms. Cisse Kagawa. A review of budgets over the last decade indicates that the budget has been dominated by the following: education, infrastructure, public administration. And yet, these same sectors, especially education, have still not picked up in terms of, vis-a-vis the budgets that is allocated to them. Where is the missing link? Thank you very much, and back to you, Charles.
Thank you very much, Sheila, and to the audience. Let me, of course, so many, and all of you are going to be bombarded with the burden to respond to them. But let me start with Robert. You wanted to take on a bit of more answering on the issue of the debt burden, whether it is sustainable, in addition to the questions that were asked to you. The issue of deviation from priorities of the, that's i.e. the supplementary budget. The new law, as we now know it, the new act provides actually now succinctly about how supplementaries can be handled. Can you have a go at that?
That's actually where I want to start. The online question about how do we fix the problem of supplementary budgets being 7% of the actual budget. The Public Finance Management Act intended to take away supplementaries completely. Instead, they provide for what they call emergency expenditure. The contingency fund is 3% of budget, which is perhaps much lower than the 7%. The idea is that you should be able to appropriate all the money in the budget, because where do they come from? Previously, you had to have a vote on account because the budget was debated after it was presented. Now the budget is debated before, so after it is debated and passed, it is read. So after presenting it, ideally you appropriate. The vote on account was the problem because you would get money that wasn't appropriated, spend it before the budget passes, back, pass the budget, and perhaps sometimes approve retrospectively. So ideally, one, we shouldn't have a problem. But the challenge is that this is still theoretical. The new law hasn't been tested. Until we see if there is political will to live within those rules, it remains a question that we'll possibly answer this time next year. Because already we are seeing that defense is asking for 740 million, which is about 2.4 trillion, over and above the entire annual budget allocation in the budget for defense alone. And what is this $740 million for? It's for buying a modern military artillery. Now, which presents the problem? Because if you give defense now 2.4 trillion, what will they run on for the next 1 year? And how do you account for the difference? It will then come back to, and why I say it comes back to testing the law is because you have to have the MPs say we will not approve the $740 million or any shilling above the 1.6 trillion that was in the budget. We'll give you entire budget, don't pay salaries, go buy an artillery. And Sheila left us a question. If you think security is important, go start a farm in Somalia. I think that's just insulting Ugandans. Because you see, over the years, we've spent so much money on defense. I think we have a great defense system. I think we are the best in the region. I think we are safer than Kenya, quite frankly, which is much richer. And credit to the government. The security we are doing well. What I don't think we should do is spend 3 times what we need to. Now, coming to the issue of the debt, I actually want to disagree with Jacob that our debt is unsustainable. And this is why. We go and borrow 8 billion for standard gauge. The project might be good in terms of infrastructure and its contribution to the national economy. The problem with that money is that a significant amount of the money we are borrowing is actually much more than we need. Kenyans cannot be doing their railway line at a fraction of our cost. Surely, unless we are building a railway line under the ocean, there has to be a reason to justify more than twice. I'll give you another example. Karuma is 1.9 billion. Anyone, any engineer in the world, and this the internet will tell you that a megawatt of hydro is $1 million to build. Let's assume I am wrong and that it's actually $2 million. For you to build Karuma for 700 million, for 700 megawatt, we would need 0.4 billion. Please account for the 500 million. Now, those are the distortions that are in the national debt that I don't think make it sustainable. The other thing you need to look at is the current budget. The Minister of Finance said we are going to go for concessional borrowing as a priority, and non-concessional where we can't get concession. That's in the preamble to the speech. And then when he gets to the priorities, he says, oh no, our actual concessional will be 1-point-something trillion. Non-concessional, which is expensive money, will be 2-point-something trillion. As to whether I misunderstood the English, that's possible. But you see, when you start to break down the debt, I don't think that GDP is a very good way to measure sustainability, because GDP is built over time, and when we talk about the debt, we seldom talk about the interest value. the cost of that money over the years, even if it were 2% over 40 years, it is not very small in terms of what we'll eventually have to pay back. So when I look at the trend we are looking at, in 2009, the national debt was $1.9 billion. In 2015, the national debt is in the range of $7 billion. That's before you include Sound Gauge Railway. So you realize that, first of all, the trajectory is changing very fast. Secondly, the accountability is just not there. Thirdly, the debt we are borrowing is actually inflated in terms of what we actually need. And that's where the problem is. So when we start to talk about sustainability, we have to break these numbers down and then look at how much people are earning. Because the question of, and the governor was saying, no, you see, to fix the shilling, people should buy Uganda. But you can't buy Ugandan goods if they don't exist. Why don't they exist? Because the incentives are given to foreign investors, not Ugandan investors. That's where the mismatch is. And that completely, because when you measure GDP, you include money that is expatriated as profit. And that's partly where the problem is. When you break down the economics, I'm having a problem understanding.
Thanks, Robert. Let Sisi take it right from there, because you talk about, both of you are engaging very well on the issue of sustainability of our debt, but there is the question of consumptive, expenditures, and some people call it wasteful. When creating new districts, new RDCs, when you create 40 more, is it 40 or 22 more are on the way for this election if we are not careful, and more RDCs, more deputy RDCs, more women MPs, more constituencies, and then more, LC5s, and then CFOs, all this bureaucracy additional. What should our budget really, be tackling in terms of, going towards socio-economic? How should we do it, in other words, Sisi? And of course, with the questions that another person had asked you, which is the issue of yes.
And actually, the issue that you raised over the increase in number of MPs and the districts and stuff like that, that will fall under public administration. When you talk of increasing the number of districts, what are we talking about? Those are structures that are being built or put in place to promote the patronage system. And again, we need to go back and look at what particular point in time do we see the whole issue of demand for districts coming up. Do some bit of research. You realize that this usually comes up during the time of elections. And this has happened in various African countries, if you go and read. And ideally, when you create a district, I'll feel very comfortable that you've given me something. It is my own. So obviously, I will owe my allegiance to that person that has put in place something like that. So obviously, this is political patronage. And it goes back to increase on the public administration budget. Because when you increase on the number of districts, what are we talking about? Again, an increase in our members of parliament. And what is very ironic and very sad is when you look at the high levels of absenteeism of the members of parliament and who is actually supposed to fund or sustain these members of parliament. It is we, the taxpayers. I think the whole system at times is very, very sad. But do we ever come up and say no? We've seen people do all sorts of outrageous things in order to get districts. And,
including eating rats.
Of course, we run on emotions and actual idea. And again, when we talk of the issues of how many debts, if you look at the percentage of the debt that you've actually been able to acquire, some of the debt monies that have actually been approved, there hasn't been quorum in parliament. And let me say, I wouldn't really mind about the debt burden, but what is the quality, what is the value for money? Now, going back to the education, we've been spending a lot of money on education. Let us even first look at the levels of corruption within the education sector. What is the quality of education? What are the learning outcomes? You see, we are going to talk of increasing salaries for the teachers, very good, but are the students learning? Are they sitting on the floor? Do they actually have desks? There's a study that we did, and it was very unfortunate that in particular 8 or 7 districts where we went to, you're going to find that over thousands of kids have only 2 pit latrines. Now, break time, guess what? The kids are all lining up to go to either to use. It is sad because you're injecting in so much, but what is the output? And again, the whole issue of saying that you're going to build teachers' houses. very good, but when you go back to the actual budget, how much are you putting in for supervision and monitoring? Because you still build for me a house as a teacher, but you're not giving me enough, I will still not teach. So again, we're not sorting or we're not solving the problem. Then when you talk about infrastructure, the person said that we're spending a lot on infrastructure. Again, it is correct. I'll just look at roads. What quality of roads are we talking about? Are we talking of feeder roads, or are we talking of these highway roads? And of course, one of the justifications that government was giving that, yes, well, let us invest more in infrastructure or roads because there's a connection between roads and agriculture. I'll say yes, but it can only go back if you're connecting the farmer to the market. And this can only be done if you have that type of road or kind of road that is going to go down to the villager to ensure that you're able to get their produce, or they're able to move their produce from the local market, from their gardens and transport. But if you're still having these very poor feeder roads, that's why you find the middlemen who go get buy the produce at a very cheap price. And of course, they will exploit them. Again, when we're talking of infrastructure, looking at roads, again, look at the Katusi Saga. You're investing in a sector whereby monies are being stolen and we don't see any action being taken. So again, there's a mismatch when it comes to priorities because we're injecting a lot in some of these sectors, but the levels of corruption are high.
Sam, and a person in the audience asked on the question of local production, do we have the capacity as a country to expand, even the revenue base? We are talking of budget, a national envelope of 24 trillion shillings, and the URA is expected to raise a projected 11 trillion shillings. But there is a study that currently indicates that actually it's only about 2 or 3 districts in Uganda, Kampala, Wakiso, and I think Mukono, that it's only these 3 districts that are bearing almost between 82 to 85% of the entire tax burden in this country. And so we need to be asking ourselves when we are talking about even the fiscal responsibility, when we are talking about the budget priorities, what in your view can be done or should be done by government to reach out to the rest of the country, that everybody must own the country by also contributing to it and therefore expand the tax base?
Yeah, thank you very much. That is very interesting, and I think what has been discussed here and what's raising is we are looking at investing into the population. Because even if it's a cow and you need to get milk out of it, you must feed it. So before you get out in terms of ensuring that you get taxes from the people, they must be working. Everyone must be having some way of engaging. And also, a number of questions have been asked, but I'll flip through.
Go for them as well.
Like, for example, there's been a big debate, especially, and it has kept on coming on issues of unemployment. And also, taking also the issue has been balancing politics and economics together. And also, if anybody would look at a budget coming at a time when we are in such a season, especially, you expect a lot of conflict between politics and to do with economics. But if I were to go to unemployment, but looking at it in coupled together with the issue of where we discuss the quality versus the quantity, especially when you're looking at the education sector, I think one of the biggest challenge that we're having in the education sector, and here I stand strong, because reforms within the education sector would automatically help in addressing the issue of unemployment. But here, and when we're looking at quality, let's not only look at it in terms of having the best grades that you're having, because we have a situation where you have young people coming out with first class and second upper but without employment. But you find that the challenge which you've had previously in Uganda, there's been a problem of mismatch between what the education system is producing and what is required in the labor market. There's been a big challenge which requires a structural adjustment within the education system itself. It is very, very important. I'll give you an example. There's a time when Uganda was flooded with a number of teachers, but when you look at the labor market cannot take up the number of teachers. And I think that's why the decision was taken to change the national trained teachers into institution of learning. Today I've seen the issue of bringing in BTVET and vocation to address the issue of skilling, but look at the historical issues about vocation and skilling part of it. Ugandans, historically, people look at it as a way taken by failures who have failed to get grades to go to university. If you look at what the rest of other countries have done, not even here, look at South Africa, most of the countries, look at the Asian tigers, most of them, there has been issue of integrating skills kind of vocational together with the formal education, so that at least you're having someone coming out of a school when himself he has a skill, but you're having young people who are not employable. It becomes really difficult. And also creating platforms that when someone leaves university, he has an opportunity to be able to get skills on how to deal with the employment environment. You've seen it in most of developed countries where they put a lot of emphasis in issues of apprenticeship, where using the private sector you have, which can take up young person, that someone who has worked somewhere for 1 year, when he goes into the labor market, he can compete with the rest of other people. And that's why you see when Kenyans come here, especially, look at the hotel industry, the vocational and the internship they do. When he comes here and you give him, for some of you who have sat on different panels, you'll see there's a difference. And I think we need to look at addressing the mismatch of what the education system will produce and also what will bring in. Even the quality, yes, if you go in most of the UPE and schools, you realize, I think we need to look at the balancing quality in terms of providing structures within such institutions and quality, but not bend on one side. I would agree with you. Even if you say, well, let's look at only quality, you will not have quality when you're having a small classroom with over 2,000 students. It's going to be difficult even for the teachers. I think that is one of the issues. Then we talked about the issue of, I think that's where it came in terms of security, agriculture, looking at structure adjustment. I think what we need to look at is the balance of all the sectors, looking at how does one complement the other. If one is complementing the other, how do I ensure that here I'll have less, but not only bending on one issue? It's true, and I think I'll agree, Robert, security is an issue, especially right now. Actually, some of us that in this period you're having such a budget in security, you're going in election period, you know very well, all of us saw what happened in the post-election violence in Kenya. If you're in any country, you must tighten in terms of security. You're in a country where you've just had a production of oil, it is coming. Look at what is happening in the Great Lakes region. Whatever is happening in every region is affecting you. But I think the debate would be in terms of not having a bigger such percentage, but at least it needed a significant figure, even when you look at what is really happening everywhere, because it is quite a big challenge. And then also someone talked about in terms of consultation. Here, I'm going to be a little hard to the political leadership. You see, if you've moved to the whole, I have a chance of being at least in every district in Uganda, and I have a big challenge. That's why we need some structural adjustment, especially when you are forming leadership at that level. And let's take this: you're having local government structures where you have the councillors who are out there, and the qualification of being a councillor, you don't need an education level. Actually, don't even if you've never stepped in class, you can become a councillor. And they're presenting a budget before you. Technical people, when someone talks about GDP, even can't know what it is all about. Actually, I think it is only for when you're either speaker or LOC5 chairperson where you need senior 6. Even at senior 6, I think we've surpassed at the level of requiring senior 6 even to go to parliament. We should go away from having a member of parliament that cannot sustain an argument in English for 5 minutes. You have, I think it's a level where, and this is cross-cutting and needs structural adjustment. But look here, the biggest population today, that's where it is. And you're having the elite class in Uganda shining out from leadership. And what is happening? You're having the ordinary people going to plan for you. I think it has come to all of us when we are looking at this. And that's why the issue of quality even in leadership, let's look at it. And also someone talked about what have you done. In fact, if I will tell you, it has been the youth leadership, and I'll give this very confidently, that through the youth council structures, you know, when you look at the structure of the youth, apart from the structures, it is all, in fact, I'll just also answer to my colleague from DP. When it comes right from the leadership with the governance structure, the representative in the local government in form of youth councillors, the youth members of parliament. Actually, you realized we had, in most of these councils, they would realize that the only people who are educated are the youth leaders. That's why majority of them, we have over 8 of them who are district speakers. Because when they come to voting, these are the only young people, maybe has finished in year 6 and is in the organ, so he can be able to stand up for such leadership. The rest of the difficult, it becomes a little difficult. I think what we need is to empower our leadership in such organs to be able to step up. The budget cycle, it's technical for the rest of other people to understand it. So I think this is where it has come in. You've asked me what have we done. Actually, one of our focus has been always stretching to ensure that we build capacity of some of these young people to even discuss the budget at this level. It becomes difficult. Look at some of our members of parliament passing policies when someone has not even read it. It's just few individuals who have read it, and even the technical people are very bright. They bring a huge document before them, and actually they know when he looks at it, how many of them do research? Let's look at some of these issues. So actually, me, I would even feel sorry for them because they will pass the budget. How many of the members of parliament have read the budget from page to page? The only people we've seen is maybe members in the civil society, because most of them are elites who have done it. So I think it really comes out to, in terms of responsibility, even the quality of what we are having. I don't want to be sarcastic to say that the leadership is always a representation of what? Of the population, what is out there. But I think...
Let me now bring in Jacob.
I'll just pointing on some of the issues which have really been coming in. And for me, I've left, leave alone the top leadership, I've just come down to break it down and see where the problem is really coming from. And this is exactly where it's coming from. Hope I'll get...
Let me thank you so much. But let me first bring in Jacob very quickly, because he needs to respond to the questions that were shot at him. But there is a specific issue that came up on. Everybody is talking about the proposal to delink or try to delink politics from the main process or framework, or as a reason that is supposed to create the budget that we have. But is that possible in your view? Uganda is multi-ethnic, so many religions, and all of them come up, and then traditional, cultures and these kings, all of them come up one day after the other, and they have to be factored into the budget cycle. Somewhere, somehow, cars or bishops, priests, and then it becomes a burden to the budget. But is that possible, or the practicality of it is that actually that is what the people want? Is that so?
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, the need of the people has never been to entirely get involved in the budget process. This is a need among the elite, that it is necessary for the people to get engaged. And it is not therefore the responsibility of the people to get engaged. It's the responsibility of the institutions to get the people engaged. For instance, if we want a participation of young people into the matters of the budget, how many economic schools do we have in our country at a level of higher education? How many symposiums have been organized in these schools of economics, in Makerere, in Chambogo, in Multitech? We do not see the ministry coming down, and yet you have young people from across the country. So it's a fair representation of the view of young people. So maybe we need to change the trend that we use to involve the people. Because if you ask the young people to come to parliament to give their opinions on something, they may not have the time, but they have the time at the institution because they are bothered by very many other things. However, the need of involving people in the budgetary process is indeed a good need, and it is a need that we cannot do away with, because it is a budget for the people nonetheless. So to involve the people is a very important thing. At what level they get involved is another question altogether. When we sit down in our village structures and we just talk about what we need in the budget, does it actually make it to the actual budget? That is a problem that Uganda has had, that the people will have a proposal, but what is presented in parliament is not what came from the people, something totally different. So we need to work out that as well. I want to address a question that has been coming up to me, the question of GDP to debt ratio. Now, when we say that the current debt GDP ratio is 27%, it is not the accumulated. It is per se the annual. So if we have a problem of an increasing debt, it is not a problem that the debt is increasing. The problem is if we will never have capacity to avert that situation. So if, for example, we are having debt to fund education, but the quality of the human resource that comes out of the education, like my brother here is sharing, is unemployable, then we risk having an education that is never existent. The UPE graduate will not be able to come off and help avert the debt burden. And that is, I think, where the discussion should be, on the nature of the service that the debt is costing us. If you look at another question on this question of debt, the question is, what is more important? Is it project support or budget support? The East has always said that I will help you in project support. But the West thinks that it is not wise to have project support. I think budget support is better. And I think that the West has a better idea on which support is necessary, because when China comes to Uganda and is funding a project, they fund us not only with the monies and the loan, they will also fund us with the manpower that will carry out the project. They will fund us with every other thing. Leads back to repatriation, and I think that is a very bad thing for the country. That is a very bad trend for the country, something we need to avert. If China would give the money to the Ministry of Finance per se, and we would budget, say if we have a standard gauge under the budget, then we are looking at audit capacities within the nation, audit capacities for the people of the nation, and so we can account more vehemently.
Make your last statement in that comment, because
Yes.
now we are left with less
Yes.
than 5 minutes, so that each of you can take 1.5 minutes.
Well, in conclusion, I think when people say that the administrative burden of this country is growing irrelevantly, that is a worthwhile statement. When we have an RDC, a CAO, we have a deputy RDC, an LC5, but the service is not coming. We are spending more on the leadership than on the institutions or on the service, on the hospital. Then there is a problem, and I think we need to check that. But we cannot check that if we continue this way, where the RDC is appointed by the will of someone and he is given the most power. It becomes a political game. It comes back to what you are saying. We cannot undo that service delivery is tagged to political play. We need to change the mode of appointment of these people that offer real services before we can question whether it can be shifted from political likening.
Thank you. Sam, your last word.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I'm really happy for the debate and also for the audience and the management. Yes, when we are talking about issue to do with the national budget, I think it concerns all the citizens of Uganda. But what is important, I think what we need to look at is, when you look at the priorities that we've talked about, the 7 strategic areas, I think to me, it's some of the areas that I think speak volume to the needs. But I think where I need to concentrate much more is on the accountability, and to ensure that the implementation is more proper, to ensure that at least implementation is done. I think that's where most of the mismatch that we've always had it. If we ensure that at least our citizens and the people, when it comes to issues of accountability, when it comes to the issue of ensuring that at least where services are being allocated, actually they are actually implemented, ensure that at least when it comes to issues of misuse of public resources, institutions can bite some more, especially on our leaders. I think this is where it is really important. And then also, it's also important that we look at the investment into the people is only measured looking at what can be in terms of being produced. We have a small local investment group where most of our local investors are not boosted, and someone mentioned it. And we need to invest in some of our local individuals to ensure that at least it is balanced. It means at the end of the day, more resources and more in terms of taxes are going to be got, and then also balancing most of the sector. I think it is really important.
Thank you. Sisi, your last word, and I don't know whether Sisi or Robert, I need someone to comment on the issue of reforms. You know, there is seriously need for reforms, and you have all talked about the issue of investing in the people. And I was checking some, you know, in some reading, actually discovered that the China that we so much talk about, actually at their best, you know, China and Malaysia in the 1990s, they decided to invest in the people, and at a level where of the revenue of the country was coming from the local, you know, what you would call in our case, the local generated, you know, revenue, not actually talking about investors, huge investors coming into the country and only doing what Jacob is saying, repatriation.
Yes, briefly, I think one of the things we need to appreciate, I think we all know the history of the Asian tigers and what they decided to do. There have been criticisms, of course, regarding the way they decided to take it on, but when you look at where they are right now, I think that is something that is very key. When you said that it comes from the people, one of the priorities of this government was to boost the private sector. If you're boosting the private sector, it is good, but is the private sector able to employ Ugandans? It won't be able to employ Ugandans because the majority are or will be unemployable. So how are you going to ensure that the local person, you know, is able to see a spillover? So I think from that's why the whole issue of probably reforms will have to come in. But generally, I would say that for budget, you know, for priorities, every country, I mean, we may all have different priorities, but how do we ensure that even the little that is put or injected to address those priorities is used well? How do we ensure that if it is a priority, there's a connection between priority, there's a connection between the allocation of monies to that priority, and there is actually a connection between implementation. Now, that way we'll be able to say that, and generally, the whole issue of accountability.
Lastly, Robert.
Charles, thank you. A number of issues have arisen. The question of whether you need to spend so much on defense. I believe that if we've been safe for 4 years, just because we have an election, double defense expenditure because people have to walk to a booth, that tells us there's an underlying problem in itself. I believe that there's a notion that the budget is a very complicated technical document, and it's true it takes a year to put together, but I think that we have to find the ways to communicate this to the ordinary person. I grew up watching my grandparents listening to radio on the day of budget speech. I don't think they knew what GDP was, but they understood an increase in the price of fuel. They understood that kerosene had gone up by shillings and cents. And we've reached a point where if the burden is going to be as heavy as 24 trillion, then we must have direct interventions that enable people to make their money. China has more savers, which is why America borrows from China. Now, until you get to the point where you can reverse the situation where salaries are now practically worthless, think of those earning 500,000. With the fuel price where it is now, how do you expect them to live? That's going to take deliberate efforts to make sure that people can actually survive in the framework that we have. The reason why people are unemployable, I believe, is because we've lost the link between education and every other sector. Even if you just took people from the best schools in this country, and I have seen them because I teach at a law school, and you bring them into the legal market, there are some that I would never hire. I'm an employer and I'm a teacher. So the issue of the mismatch is much larger than which school I went to, or it's gone down to every sector. Just because you improve the quality of a school doesn't mean you get a better product. And that's where I agree with Sisi that accountability for the little that we have is very, very important. But let's take it further and link all the sectors together. This business of saying that we need only ICT, you can't argue a case in court using a computer. And when Sisi is done going after the corrupt, you still need the lawyer. So I think that those linkages need to be more streamlined, and they need to be better organized and better thought out. But to do that, we must put the Ugandan at the forefront. We must enable the Ugandan who's doing their best. There are people out there who wake up in the morning and go and hustle. Let's create an environment for them to prosper, as opposed to creating an environment for them to compete with an investor who is favored and has these incentives that enable them to go along, including access to capital. And that's the other thing we didn't talk about, access to capital and the tax burden, and how those two are going about. Because the guys in the informal sector have all this money, they're not paying the tax. You and I, who are on pay as you earn and VAT and those other taxes, bear their burden. And that's unfair. So when we start to look at the Ugandan and from a broader perspective and plan for everyone, and then just give everyone an opportunity to produce, then we can tax them equally. We'll get to a better understanding of what priorities should be.
Well, 24 trillion shillings from our taxpayers' money, does that represent your interest? Is it a priority that we have set from the people? That is the question that the debate can continue. Thanks so much, Robert, Sisi, Sam, and Jacob. Thanks. And to you, the audience here at Serena, thank you so much for your time and for being part of the debate. I want to thank so much the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies that has put this together with, NTV Uganda, Uganda Youth Network, the International Republican Institute, IRI, the Democratic Governance Facility. Thanks so much. And my colleague, Sheila, thank you so much, of course, for co-moderating with me. I want to thank so much the technical team that is behind this, Sam, Charles, and your team. And of course, this is the Situation Room, the 5th edition. Next week, we are going to be, the Situation Room is traveling to Tororo, and the topic will be the budget of the East African community. Thank you so much, and have a good weekend and a good evening.
NTV, turning on your world.
Start fresh every day. But during the day, it's natural for odor to creep back in. That's why you need Rexona Roll-On with Sweat Guard after every morning shower to keep you feeling clean, dry, and fresh every day. So you always pass the freshness test. Rexona, it won't let you down.
This is NTV. This program is rated PG. It is suitable for children ages 8 and above, but parental